never imagined that a single dinner could unravel the fabric of my life. But here I am, still grappling with the aftermath of that fateful evening. My name is Sarah, and at 28, I thought I was living the dream. I had a budding career as a fashion designer in New York City, a city that pulsed with creativity and opportunity. My husband, David, 30, was a successful executive at a tech company, and together we seemed to have it all. However, that night, as I prepared for dinner at my in-laws' lavish home, I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The Hartleys were a family of affluence and influence, and I had always felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I smoothed my designer dress, a piece I had splurged on to impress my mother-in-law, Eleanor, who had a reputation for her discerning taste. As I stepped into their grand mansion, I was struck by the opulence surrounding me. The chandeliers sparkled like stars, and the walls were adorned with art that could rival a gallery. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect setting, I sensed an undercurrent of tension. Little did I know this dinner would be the catalyst for a series of events that would change my life forever. As I walked through the foyer, I spotted David, looking dapper in his tailored suit, but his expression was unreadable. "You're late," he said, his tone clipped. "My parents have been asking about you." I glanced at my watch, surprised to see I was only 5 minutes late. "Traffic was—" I started, but he cut me off, ushering me inside. "Let's just get this over with." The dining room was a sight to behold, with a long mahogany table set with fine china and sparkling silverware. Candles flickered, casting a warm glow over the room, but I felt anything but warm. At the head of the table sat Eleanor, her perfectly coiffed hair and pursed lips radiating disapproval. To her right was my father-in-law, Henry, a man whose stern demeanor could silence a room. "Ah, Sarah," Henry said, his voice booming. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd join us." I felt my cheeks flush as I took my seat next to David. "I'm sorry for the delay. The traffic was terrible," I managed to say, but Eleanor's arched eyebrow told me my excuse fell flat. As the evening progressed, I felt increasingly uncomfortable. The conversation flowed around me, touching on topics I knew little about: stock options, tech innovations, and charity galas I had never attended. Each attempt I made to contribute was met with thinly veiled disdain from Eleanor or dismissive grunts from Henry. I was an outsider, tolerated but never truly accepted. As the main course was served, a beautifully presented filet mignon, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. That's when Eleanor turned her attention to me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "So, Sarah, how is that little design job of yours going? Still playing dress-up?" I swallowed hard, setting down my fork. "It's going well, thank you. I just launched a new collection that's getting some attention." "Oh, that's nice," she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "I hope it pays well enough to keep up with our family's lifestyle. It must be so difficult coming from such modest beginnings." A flash of anger surged within me, but I pushed it down. "My job pays well, Eleanor. I'm quite satisfied with my career." Henry chuckled, a sound devoid of any real mirth. "Well, as long as you're satisfied. One would hope for more than mere satisfaction in life. Wouldn't you agree, David?" I turned to David, hoping for some support, but he merely shrugged, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Sarah's job is fine," he muttered, not meeting my gaze. The tension in the room was palpable, and I felt increasingly isolated. Every comment seemed designed to remind me of my place, or rather, my lack of place in this family. As dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate soufflé adorned with gold leaf, I felt a sense of impending doom. That's when David leaned over, a strange smirk playing on his lips. "You've got the check, right?" he whispered. "It's $20,000. For a moment, I thought he was joking, but the icy glare from Eleanor across the table told me otherwise. My mind raced. $20,000 for a dinner? Surely you can't be serious." Henry cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable for the first time that evening. "Well, Sarah, we thought it was time you contributed something to these family gatherings. You've been enjoying our hospitality for years now." I felt as though I had been slapped. "But I don't have that kind of money on me. I can't possibly." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Eleanor snapped. "Don't tell me you can't afford a simple dinner. What do you do with all the money David gives you?" My cheeks burned with humiliation. "David doesn't give me any money. I pay for everything with my own salary." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel their judgment, their disappointment, their utter disdain radiating across the table. David sat beside me, silent and unmoved, as if this was all perfectly normal. With shaking hands, I reached for my purse. I had some savings I'd been putting aside for a rainy day, but I never imagined I'd be using it like this. As I transferred the funds, I felt something break inside me. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about putting me in my place. As we left the mansion that night, I felt hollow. The cool autumn air that had seemed pleasant earlier now chilled me to the bone. David walked ahead of me, not bothering to see if I was keeping up. In that moment, I realized that the life I thought I had, the loving marriage, the supportive family, was nothing but an illusion. Little did I know this dinner was just the beginning. The events that would unfold in the coming days would shake the very foundation of my world, exposing truths I never could have imagined, and testing my strength in ways I never thought possible. As I climbed into our car, a sense of foreboding settled over me. Something had changed that night, and there was no going back. The drive home from my in-laws' mansion was eerily silent. David gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and I couldn't bring myself to break the tension. The events of the dinner replayed in my mind, each remembered slight feeling like a fresh wound. I had never felt so small, so insignificant. As we pulled into our driveway, I hoped that once we were home, we could talk about what had happened, maybe even laugh about the ridiculousness of it all. How wrong I was. The moment we stepped through our front door, the atmosphere shifted. The silence that had accompanied us on the drive home suddenly felt oppressive, suffocating. I reached out to touch David's arm, seeking some form of comfort or connection, but he jerked away as if my touch burned him. "David, what's going on?" I asked, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the quiet of our house. He turned to face me, and I almost took a step back. The man looking at me wasn't the husband I knew. His eyes were cold, his jaw set in a hard line. "Pack your things," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. What? What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, David brushed past me and headed upstairs. Confusion and fear battled for dominance in my mind as I followed him. When I reached our bedroom, I found him yanking open drawers and pulling out my clothes. "David, stop! What are you doing?" I cried, trying to grab a shirt from his hands. He shoved me away, not roughly, but with enough force to make me stumble. "You're done here," he spat, stuffing my clothes into a garbage bag. "I want a divorce. You're nothing but a leech, Sarah. Get out of my house and don't come back." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? But as I watched David methodically packing my life away, the reality of the situation began to sink in. "David, please," I begged, tears starting to form in my eyes. "Can we talk about this? I don't understand what's happening." He paused for a moment, and for a split second I thought I saw a flicker of the man I married in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "There's nothing to talk about," he said coldly. "You've been using me, using my family. Did you think we wouldn't figure it out?" "Using you?" I repeated, incredulous. David, I've been working hard, contributing to our life together. How can you say that? He laughed then, a harsh, bitter sound that made me flinch. Contributing? Don't make me laugh. You're nothing without us, Sarah. You're from a nobody family with a nobody job. Everything you have is because of me and my family. Each word was like a knife, cutting deeper and deeper. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the shock of it all rendered me nearly speechless. As David continued to pack my belongings, I sank down onto the bed, our bed, trying to make sense of how my life had fallen apart so quickly. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs. For a wild moment I thought perhaps it was the police coming to put an end to this madness, but no, it was Eleanor, my mother-in-law, her face a mask of smug contempt. "Oh, good, David, you're taking out the trash," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. She turned her gaze to me, and I shrank back from the hatred I saw there. "You never belonged in this family. Goodbye, parasite." I looked from Eleanor to David, desperately searching for any sign that this was all a terrible mistake. But their faces were set, united in their desire to cast me out. In that moment, I realized that the family I thought I had married into, the life I thought I had built, was nothing but a carefully constructed lie. With shaking hands, I began to help pack my things. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else go through the motions. I packed my clothes, my books, the few personal items I had brought into this house. Each object I touched seemed to hold a memory, a reminder of the life I thought I had. As I packed, I couldn't help but think about how I had ended up here. I remembered the day I met David, how charming and kind he had seemed. I thought about our whirlwind romance, the fancy dates, the expensive gifts. Had it all been a setup? Had he been playing me from the very beginning? And what about my career? I had worked hard to get where I was, but now doubt crept in. Had I really earned my position, or had David's influence played a bigger role than I realized? The uncertainty made me feel sick to my stomach. Within an hour, my life had been reduced to a few garbage bags and boxes. David carried them downstairs and unceremoniously dumped them on the front lawn. I followed behind, feeling numb and disconnected from reality. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and I shivered. I hadn't even thought to grab a jacket. I turned back to the house, to David standing in the doorway, hoping against hope that he would change his mind, that this was all some horrible misunderstanding. "David, please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can work this out. Whatever I've done wrong, I can fix it. Just give me a chance." For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but then Eleanor appeared behind him, her hand on his shoulder. "Don't let her manipulate you, David," she hissed. "She's shown her true colors. It's time to cut her loose." David's face hardened again. "You heard my mother. It's over, Sarah. Don't come back here." And with that, he closed the door. I stood there on the lawn, surrounded by the hastily packed remnants of my life, staring at the house that had been my home. The lights went out one by one until I was left in darkness. Reality began to set in, bringing with it a wave of panic. Where would I go? What would I do? I had put all my savings into paying for that ridiculous dinner. I had no family nearby, and most of my friends were really David's friends. In the space of a few hours, I had become truly alone. I pulled out my phone, thinking I could call a taxi or book a hotel room, but as I unlocked the screen, I realized with a sinking feeling that my credit cards were joint accounts with David. Would they even work anymore? I had some cash in my wallet, but not nearly enough for a hotel room. With no other options, I began to walk. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just knew I couldn't stay there, staring at the dark windows of the house that had rejected me. As I walked, pulling my suitcase behind me and carrying as much as I could, tears began to fall freely down my face. The streets were quiet at this late hour, the houses I passed full of families sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding outside. I felt like a ghost, invisible and disconnected from the world around me. How could life go on as normal when my entire world had just imploded? After walking for what felt like hours, I found myself in front of a small motel. It wasn't much, certainly nothing like the luxury I had become accustomed to, but it was a roof over my head. I checked in, using most of the cash I had on me to pay for a week's stay. The room was small and shabby, with peeling wallpaper and a musty smell, but as I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. Yes, I had lost everything. Yes, I had been betrayed and cast aside by the people I thought loved me. But I was still here. I was still breathing. And for the first time in years, I was truly free. As I lay down on the uncomfortable bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I made a promise to myself. I would not let this break me. Somehow, some way, I would rebuild my life, and I would never again allow myself to be so dependent on others that I could lose everything in a single night. Sleep eluded me that night in the dingy motel room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's cold stare and heard Eleanor's venomous words. The ceiling fan creaked rhythmically above me, a constant reminder of how far I had fallen in just a few hours. From a luxurious home to this, a room that smelled of stale cigarettes and broken dreams. As the night wore on, I tossed and turned, my mind racing. How had I not seen this coming? Were there signs I had missed? I replayed every interaction with David and his family over the past few years, searching for clues, but all I found were more questions. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep altogether. I sat up in bed, wrapping the thin, scratchy blanket around my shoulders, and stared out the window. The neon vacancy sign flickered erratically, casting an eerie red glow into the room. It felt fitting. My life, too, was flickering, unstable. I tried to think practically about what I would do next. I had a job, at least for now, but would David try to interfere with that, too? My phone lay silent on the bedside table. No missed calls, no messages. It was as if I had ceased to exist in the world I had known just yesterday. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the threadbare curtains, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the kind of calm that comes after a storm, when you realize you've survived something you never thought you could. I was alone, yes, but I was also free. Free from the constant judgment, the put. I got up and took a shower, letting the lukewarm water wash away the tears and the shock of the night before. The towels were rough against my skin, nothing like the plush Egyptian cotton I was used to, but they did the job. As I dried off, I caught a glimpse of myself in the cloudy mirror. I looked tired, my eyes puffy from crying. But there was something else there, too, a glimmer of determination. "You can do this, Sarah," I told my reflection. "You're stronger than they think." I dressed in the clothes I had hastily packed the night before, a simple blouse and slacks that felt like armor against the world. I was just considering whether to brave the vending machine in the lobby for breakfast when my phone buzzed, shattering the quiet of the early morning. For a moment, I just stared at the device, my heart racing. Who could be calling at this hour? Part of me hoped it was David calling to say it had all been a terrible mistake. Another part dreaded hearing his voice, afraid of what more hurt he could inflict. With a shaking hand, I picked up the phone. "Sarah?" David's voice came through, sounding nothing like the cold, dismissive man from the night before. He sounded panicked. "Thank God you answered. Something's happened. We need you back at the house." I sat down heavily on the bed, my mind whirling. "David, what are you talking about? I know we don't deserve it, but we need you. Can you come?" In the background, I could hear what sounded like sobbing. It took me a moment to realize it was Eleanor, the woman who had called me a parasite just hours ago. now wailing like a child. "David, slow down," I said, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. "What kind of emergency? What's happened?" There was a pause, and when David spoke again, his voice was lower, as if he was trying not to be overheard. "It's Dad. Henry. He's gone." "Gone?" I repeated, not comprehending. "What do you mean, gone?" "His mind can't explain over the phone," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, Sarah, I know we don't deserve it, but we need you. Can you come?" I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing. Henry was missing. What did that mean? And why on earth would they need me after everything they had done? Everything they had said? How could they possibly expect me to help? But even as these thoughts raced through my mind, I found myself standing up, gathering my things. Despite everything, a small part of me still cared, and a larger part was desperately curious to know what could have happened to turn things around so dramatically. "I'll be there in an hour," I heard myself say, and then I hung up before I could change my mind. As I checked out of the motel and hailed a taxi, I tried to prepare myself for what I might find at the house. Had Henry had a heart attack? A stroke? Or was this all some elaborate trick to humiliate me further? The taxi driver gave me a concerned look in the rearview mirror. I must have looked a sight, a woman in rumpled clothes with dark circles under her eyes, heading to one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in town at the crack of dawn. "Everything okay, miss?" he asked as we pulled out of the motel parking lot. I met his eyes in the mirror and managed a weak smile. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "But I guess I'm about to find out." As the taxi pulled up to the Hartley mansion, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. The grand facade that had once seemed so inviting now loomed over me like a dark cloud. I stepped out, my heart pounding in my chest, and made my way to the front door. The familiar path felt foreign, each step heavy with uncertainty. I knocked hesitantly, and after a moment the door swung open to reveal David, his face pale and drawn. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The house was eerily quiet, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by a somber atmosphere that hung thick in the air. "Where's Eleanor?" I asked, glancing around. The living room was dimly lit, and I could see the outlines of family photos on the walls. Happy moments frozen in time, now overshadowed by the current crisis. "She's in the study," David replied, his eyes darting away from mine. "She's taking it hard." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of sympathy and resentment. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel a pang of compassion for Eleanor. Losing a spouse was unimaginable, even for someone who had treated me so poorly. As I made my way to the study, I could hear Eleanor's muffled sobs. I hesitated at the door, unsure of how to approach her, but before I could knock, David pushed it open and stepped inside. "Mom?" he called softly. Eleanor looked up, her face streaked with tears. "David," she choked out, her voice breaking. "What are we going to do? Your father? He's gone." I stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in a moment of raw vulnerability. David moved to comfort his mother, wrapping his arms around her as she wept into his shoulder. I felt a pang of longing for the kind of familial love they shared, even amidst the chaos. After a few moments, David turned to me, his expression shifting from grief to something more guarded. "Sarah, I know things have been complicated between us, but I need your help. We need to figure out what happened to Dad." "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping further into the room. "What happened?" David took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. "He was found at the office late last night. They think it was a heart attack, but I don't know. Something doesn't feel right. I need you to help me look into it." I felt a rush of confusion. "You want me to help you investigate your father's death? After everything that happened last night?" "Please," he pleaded, his voice cracking. I know I don't deserve it, but I can't do this alone. I need someone I can trust." The weight of his words hung in the air, and I felt a flicker of something. Perhaps it was the remnants of love I had for him, or maybe it was the instinct to help someone in need. "Okay," I said slowly, "but we need to be careful. If there's something suspicious, we have to tread lightly." David nodded, relief washing over his features. "Thank you, Sarah. I know this is a lot to ask." As we began to discuss the details, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too surreal. Just hours ago, I had been packing my life into garbage bags, and now I was being drawn back into the very family that had cast me aside. But as David and I began to strategize, I felt a sense of purpose returning. We spent the next hour going through Henry's office, which was filled with the trappings of a successful businessman: framed awards, family photos, and a meticulously organized desk. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but my mind kept drifting back to the dinner, to the way David had turned on me so quickly. "Do you have any idea why he would have been at the office so late?" I asked, rifling through some papers. David shook his head. He was always a workaholic, but he had mentioned something about a big deal he was working on. I thought it was just business as usual. As we searched, I couldn't help but notice the tension between us. The intimacy we had once shared felt distant, replaced by an awkwardness that was hard to ignore. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but the memories of the previous night loomed large in my mind. After a while, we found a folder labeled "Confidential" tucked away in the back of the desk. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing documents related to a merger that Henry had been negotiating. The numbers were staggering, and I could see why it would have been a high-pressure situation. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a particular page. "This deal is worth millions. If something went wrong, it could have serious implications for the company." David leaned over, his brow furrowing as he scanned the documents. "You think someone might have wanted to sabotage him?" "It's possible," I replied, feeling a sense of urgency. "We need to find out who else was involved in this deal. If there's foul play, we need to know." Just then, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and puffy. "What are you two doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Mom, we're just looking through Dad's things," David said, trying to keep his tone calm. "Looking for what? Answers? You think you can just waltz in here and figure everything out?" "Eleanor, please," I interjected, trying to diffuse the situation. "We're just trying to understand what happened. We want to help." She glared at me, her expression a mix of grief and anger. "You think you can help? You're the last person I want in this house right now." "Mom, stop," David said, stepping between us. "Sarah is here because I asked her to help. We need to work together." Eleanor's face softened slightly, but the tension remained. "Fine, but don't think for a second that I trust her." As she turned to leave, I felt a surge of frustration. I had been nothing but supportive, and yet here I was, still the outsider. But I pushed those feelings aside. This wasn't about me. It was about finding out what had happened to Henry. "Let's keep looking," I said to David, trying to focus on the task at hand. "We need to find out who was involved in this deal, and if there's anything suspicious." As we continued to sift through the papers, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of uncovering something significant. The stakes were high, and I knew that whatever we found could change everything, not just for David and Eleanor, but for me as well. The hours passed in a blur as David and I combed through Henry's office, piecing together fragments of information that could lead us to the truth. The atmosphere was thick with tension, but beneath it lay a shared determination to uncover what had happened. As we sifted through the documents, I noticed a recurring name: Mark Thompson, a business associate of Henry's who had been involved in the merger discussions. "David, look at this," I said, pointing to a series of emails that detailed meetings between Henry and Mark. They were in constant communication leading up to his death. David leaned closer, his brow furrowing. I've met Mark a few times. He seemed ambitious, but I never thought much of it. Do you think he could be involved? It's possible, I replied, feeling a knot of unease in my stomach. If there was pressure to finalize the deal, it could have led to a confrontation. We should find out more about him. Just then, Eleanor re-entered the room, her expression a mix of grief and determination. "What are you two doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "You're not going to find anything that will bring him back." "Mom, we're trying to understand what happened," David said, his tone pleading. "We need to know if there was something more to this." Eleanor crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "And what do you think you'll find? You think you can just dig through his things and uncover some grand conspiracy?" "Maybe we can," I interjected, trying to keep my voice steady. "If there's something suspicious, we need to know. For your sake, for David's sake, and for the company." Eleanor's expression softened slightly, but the anger still simmered beneath the surface. "Fine, but don't expect me to help you. I want nothing to do with this." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving David and me alone once more. I could feel the weight of her disapproval, but I pushed it aside. This was bigger than any family feud. We were searching for answers. "Let's look up Mark Thompson," I suggested, pulling out my phone. "We need to see if he's available for a conversation." David nodded, his expression serious. "I'll try to find his number. If he was involved in the deal, he might know something about what happened to Dad." As I scrolled through my phone, I found Mark's LinkedIn profile and noted his current position. "He's still with the company," I said, glancing at David. "We should go to the office and see if we can talk to him." "Right now?" David asked, his eyes widening. "Do you think that's a good idea?" "We need to act fast," I replied, feeling a sense of urgency. "If there's something shady going on, we can't let it slip away. We need to confront him before he has a chance to cover his tracks." David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's do it." We made our way to the office, the tension between us palpable. As we drove, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and determination. This was a dangerous game we were playing, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to know the truth. When we arrived at the sleek corporate building, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. This was the world I had once aspired to be a part of, the world I had thought I belonged to. Now, it felt foreign and intimidating. We entered the lobby, and David approached the receptionist. "Hi, I'm David Hartley. I need to speak with Mark Thompson. Is he available?" The receptionist looked up, her expression neutral. "I can check for you. Please have a seat." We sat in the waiting area, the silence stretching between us. I could feel David's tension radiating off him, and I reached out to place a reassuring hand on his arm. "We'll get through this," I said softly. "We're in this together." He nodded, but I could see the worry etched on his face. After a few minutes, the receptionist returned. "Mr. Thompson is in a meeting right now, but I can schedule an appointment for you." "Can you tell him it's urgent?" David asked, his voice firm. "It's about his recent dealings with my father." The receptionist hesitated, then nodded. "I'll let him know you're here." As we waited, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. What if Mark had something to hide? What if he was involved in whatever had happened to Henry? The thought sent a chill down my spine. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the receptionist returned. "Mr. Thompson can see you now. Follow me." We stood and followed her down a long corridor, the walls lined with modern art and glass offices. I could hear the low hum of conversations and the clatter of keyboards, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling in my mind. When we reached Mark's office, the receptionist knocked lightly before opening the door. "Mr. Thompson, David Hartley is here to see you." "Send them in," came Mark's voice from inside. As we entered, I was struck by the contrast between Mark's polished appearance and the chaos of the situation. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his hair neatly styled. He looked up from his desk, a smile fading as he recognized David. "David, what a surprise," Mark said, his tone friendly but guarded. "What brings you here?" "We need to talk about my father," David said, his voice steady. "I want to know what happened the night he died." Mark's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "I'm not sure what you mean. I thought it was a heart attack." "Was it?" I interjected, unable to hold back. "Or was there something more going on?" Mark's eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. "Look, I don't know what you're implying, but Henry was under a lot of stress. The merger was a big deal, and he was working late to finalize everything." "Did he mention anything unusual to you?" David pressed, leaning forward. "Any threats? Any reason to believe someone might want to harm him?" Mark hesitated, glancing at the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. "There were some tensions with the other partners, but nothing that would lead to, well, you know." "Nothing that would lead to what?" I pressed, sensing he was holding back. "There were disagreements. Henry was a tough negotiator, and not everyone appreciated his methods," Mark said, his voice low. "But I can't believe anyone would go that far." "Do you have any names?" David asked, his tone urgent. "Anyone who might have had a motive?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There's always someone unhappy in these deals. I can give you a list of the partners involved, but I can't guarantee anything." "Please," I said, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "We need to know everything." Mark nodded slowly, his expression shifting from defensive to contemplative. "Okay, I'll send you the information, but you need to be careful. This isn't just business, it's personal." As we left Mark's office, I felt a mix of hope and dread. We were getting closer to the truth, but I knew that uncovering it could lead to dangerous consequences. "Do you think he's hiding something?" David asked as we walked back to the car. "I think he knows more than he's letting on," I replied, my mind racing. "But we need to dig deeper. We can't let this go." David nodded, determination etched on his face. "Let's find out who was involved in that merger and see if we can uncover the truth about what happened to my father." As we drove away from the office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer just about uncovering the truth for David's sake. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own identity. I was no longer the outsider. I was a part of this fight, and I would do whatever it took to uncover the truth. The drive back to the Hartley mansion was filled with a tense silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. I could feel the weight of the investigation pressing down on us, the urgency to uncover the truth about Henry's death growing stronger with every passing moment. Once we arrived, David and I retreated to the study, the same room where we had first begun to piece together the mystery. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for us to uncover the secrets hidden within. "Let's start with the list of partners involved in the merger," David said, pulling out his laptop. "If we can find out who had the most to gain from Henry's death, we might be able to connect the dots." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "We should also look into any recent communications or meetings they had with him. If there was tension, it might have been documented." As David began to search for the information, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of something significant. The pieces were starting to come together, and I could sense that we were getting closer to the truth. After a few minutes, David found the list of partners involved in the merger. "Here it is," he said, scrolling through the names. "There are a few familiar ones, but one stands out. Richard Lawson. He's been known to have disagreements with Dad in the past." "Let's look him up," I suggested, my heart racing. If he had a motive, we need to know what it was. As we dug deeper, we discovered that Richard had a history of aggressive business tactics and had been involved in several lawsuits over the years. "This guy doesn't play nice," I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. If he felt threatened by Henry's leadership, he might have seen this merger as a way to take control. David's expression darkened. "We need to confront him. If he had anything to do with my father's death, we can't let him get away with it." "Agreed," I replied, feeling a mix of fear and resolve. "But we need to be careful. We don't know how he'll react." After gathering as much information as we could, we decided to pay Richard a visit. As we drove to his office, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. This was it. The moment we would either uncover the truth or put ourselves in danger. When we arrived at Richard's office, the atmosphere was tense. The sleek, modern building felt imposing, and I could sense the power dynamics at play. David and I exchanged a glance, both of us steeling ourselves for what lay ahead. We entered the lobby and the receptionist looked up, her expression neutral. "Can I help you?" "I'm David Hartley. I need to speak with Richard Lawson," he said, his voice steady. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, but it's urgent," I added, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on us. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone. "I'll see if he's available." After a few moments, she nodded. "You can go in. He's expecting you." As we walked down the corridor, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. This was the moment we had been working toward, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into a lion's den. Richard's office was large and imposing, filled with dark wood furniture and expensive artwork. He looked up from his desk as we entered, a smile fading from his face as he recognized David. "David Hartley," he said, his tone cool. "What brings you here?" "We need to talk about my father," David said, his voice firm. "I want to know what happened the night he died." Richard leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but Henry's death was a tragedy. He was under a lot of stress with the merger." "Was it just stress?" I interjected, unable to hold back. "Or was there something more? We know about the tensions surrounding the deal." Richard's expression hardened. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Sarah. You have no idea what you're getting into." "Maybe not," I replied, my voice steady. "But we're not leaving until we get answers." David stepped forward, his eyes blazing with determination. "Did you have anything to do with my father's death? Did you threaten him?" Richard's demeanor shifted, and I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You think you can come in here and accuse me? You have no proof." "Maybe not yet," I said, feeling a surge of confidence. "But we're going to find it. If you had a hand in this, we will uncover the truth." Richard's expression darkened, and for a moment I thought he might lash out, but then he leaned back in his chair, a calculating look in his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, David. If you want to dig into this, be prepared for the consequences." "Consequences?" David echoed, his voice rising. "You think you can intimidate us? We're not afraid of you." Richard's smile returned, but it was cold and devoid of warmth. "You should be. This isn't just about business. It's personal, and I won't let anyone threaten my position." With that, he waved us off, dismissing us as if we were nothing. As we left his office, I felt a mix of anger and fear. We had confronted him, but it was clear that he was not going to back down easily. "What do we do now?" David asked, his expression troubled. "We keep digging," I replied, my resolve strengthening. "We need to find more evidence, something that ties him to your father's death. We can't let him intimidate us." As we drove back to the mansion, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer just about uncovering the truth for David's sake. It was about justice for Henry and reclaiming my own life. I was no longer the outsider. I was a part of this fight, and I would do whatever it took to uncover the truth. Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly, reaching out to contacts, digging through records, and piecing together the timeline of events leading up to Henry's death. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Richard had a motive, and possibly even an opportunity. Finally, we received a breakthrough. A former employee of Richard's reached out, willing to share information about the tensions surrounding the merger and the threats Richard had made against Henry. He was furious when Henry refused to back down, the source said. I overheard him saying he'd do whatever it took to win. With this new information, we felt empowered. We gathered everything we had and decided to confront Richard one last time, armed with evidence and determination. When we arrived at his office, I could feel the tension in the air. This was it, the moment we would either uncover the truth or put ourselves in danger. Richard looked up as we entered, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "What do you want now?" he snapped. "We have evidence," David said, his voice steady. "You threatened my father, and we know about your involvement in the merger." Richard's face paled slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "You think you can intimidate me with hearsay? You have nothing." I stepped forward, holding out the documents we had gathered. "This is proof of your threats and your motives. We're going to the authorities." Richard's expression darkened, and I could see the anger boiling beneath the surface. "You're making a mistake," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Maybe," I replied, feeling a surge of confidence. "But we're not backing down. You will be held accountable for what you did." With that, we turned and left his office, knowing that we had taken a stand. We would not let fear dictate our actions any longer. In the days that followed, we worked with the authorities to present our findings. Richard was called in for questioning, and as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that he had been involved in a web of deceit and manipulation surrounding the merger. As the truth came to light, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We had uncovered the truth, and justice would be served. But more than that, I had found my own strength in the process. I was no longer the woman who had been cast aside. I was a fighter, and I would continue to stand up for what was right. In the aftermath, David and I found a new understanding between us. The bond we had forged through this ordeal had changed us both, and as we stood together, I felt a sense of hope for the future. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to rebuild our lives on our own terms. As I looked out at the horizon, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head-on. I had reclaimed my life, my identity, and my strength, and I would never let anyone take that away from me again.